Hey, how's it going? My name is Microblizz, and I speedrun line races in Tetris. I usually specialize in 40 lines, but today I'm running 1,000 lines, which doesn't have much difference between them except that it's a much longer run, and you need different kinds of strategies for it. But first off, some things to keep in mind during this run is that the amount of pieces that are required for completing this run most efficiently is 2,500 pieces. For 40 lines, just by comparison, you can do it in 100 lines. So that would represent a perfect clear, which typically doesn't happen. In those kind of cases, you're usually going to finish with 1 to 3 pieces more than the actual required amounts. Is typically not in your benefit to try to plan out for perfect clears because those are very rare. But anyway, 1 to 3 pieces within that range is considered as efficient as you can get. Something else to keep in mind is the statistics on the bottom of the screen. So you see there it says PPS. That represents how fast you are. So PPS stands for pieces per second. So at the moment I'm stacking 4.26 pieces per second. Another thing to keep in mind is finesse. Finesse is also a part of efficiency. So there's something called two-step finesse, which allows you to get any given piece to in any given orientation to any spot in the matrix with the least amount of key presses. So if done right, then you should be able to get most pieces on the board in whatever position you want within 2 key presses. And this isn't counting the hard drop button. Something else to keep in mind is KPT, which isn't listed on the actual statistics there, but what KPT represents is how many keys you press per tetramino. So that ties into finesse. So with two-step finesse, ideally you want to get at least under 3 keys per tetramino, and that would represent efficient finesse and a good rate of keys per tetramino. Something else to keep in mind is DAS and ARR. And that's actually one of the reasons why I'm able to play this fast. On official versions of the game and just other guideline versions like Tetris Friends and Tetris Battle, it also has this feature, but this one allows you to just go even further. So what ARR stands for is auto repeat rate. So this represents how fast you can move your pieces from left to right. In this game, it's signified by milliseconds. So at the moment, I'm playing at 67 milliseconds, which relates to the second part of my explanation, which is delayed auto shift, DAS. This is how long it takes before the speed kicks in. So whatever you set your speed as, what I have set here is 67 milliseconds, which means that it'll take 67 milliseconds for the speed that you set it in to kick in. So moving on, something else to keep in mind is how I'm stacking. So to beat this mode, there are actually a number of different stacking methods that you could employ. Some are more effective than others. Most typically, though, you'll see players using the method that I'm using right now, which is stacking with one column to the right empty. And the reason for this is because the purpose of stacking in Tetris's before was to reduce line clear delay. In guideline versions of Tetris before this one was released, there was something called line clear delay. So whenever you clear the line, there would be a short delay, and you'd have to account for that. So something that some people found out was that this was wasting a lot of time. So to make sure that you minimize the amount of time that you're using, you would stack for Tetrises, because that was the most amount of lines that you can clear. In that way, you would be reducing the amount of time that the line clear delay would be activated. In this, though, line clear delay doesn't exist. But one other feature of this stacking method is that it allows you to stack cleanly and flatly compared to other stacking methods. So what I mean is there's always a way to stack, and keeping your field plain and even, and making sure that you have options, making sure you have a place for any piece that happens to come about. That's very important, and that's part of the benefits of stacking in this way. Some other methods are, one of them is called 6-3, which is essentially the same as this. You still leave a column open, but instead of leaving a column to the right open, you leave either a column on column 7 or column 4. And the reason for doing this is, while it's more difficult to keep an even field, theoretically, you use the least amount of key presses for this, and it reduces the amount of awkward placements and awkward key combinations that you would have to make in comparison to the other stacking methods. Another one is Korean style stacking. So this one was largely popularized by, or it's known as Korean style because there used to be this version of Tetris called Han Game, and in Han Game, which was based in Korea, you would see Korean players stacking in this way. And this is actually regarded as a method that would allow you to spend the least amount of key presses, even more so than 6-3 stacking. And what it entails is just stacking for singles rather than Tetrises. And that was more popular in that version of Tetris just because it was a faster client. And because of the fact that there was no line clear delay, you wouldn't be punished for stacking for those. So it requires a little more improvisation, but it's still possible. And the last way, this one probably isn't even worth mentioning, but some people thought it would be a good idea to mess up your field and then try to downstack through it. That's also one way you can play this game, but I personally wouldn't recommend it because the amount of skill that is required for that is enormous. So you shouldn't try it unless you know how to properly downstack. That's messing up your field and then being able to clear through to the bottom again. So it's not very user friendly, I will say. When you first start off, it's going to be a more difficult method, although some people, once they get downstacking down, it's a lot easier to do it. So amid all these stacking methods, there's also something called skimming. And skimming means that, if you're caught with an uneven stack, then you can just clear it on the left or the right side or wherever, just to be able to maintain your stack. Stack stability is incredibly important for longer marathons, which is why this is an incredibly important and heavily used feature of the game. And you saw me doing it a couple times to keep my field even. So the last thing is 1,000 line strategy. Because this is technically a marathon kind of game or version of Tetris, then you're going to have to take into account of that. So one of the ways is to tap lighter, for example. Because there's higher KPS, it's typically more punishing on your fingers to tap too quickly. And one way to combat this is to the longer campaign is probably finger exercises. Jumping jacks also keep your blood flowing to the brain. It helps you think faster. The strategy that I employ most of all in this video, though, is play slower at the beginning, and then in the last 300 lines, play as fast as possible, because that's pivotal for the run. That's where you fail the most, and that's where you experience the most fatigue. So, to make sure that you get the movements down, you got to get that down. But that's pretty much everything that I have to say about this version of Tetris and this speedrun. Thanks.